Welcome to another episode of Titan PI TV, where we're looking at the inside workings of a live operational investigation agency, that being here, Titan in Derby. These episodes are designed to look at questions which are interesting, or at least we think are interesting about the industry, questions that we are asked by clients or prospective clients on a day-to-day basis, so it's informative, but also from industry professionals who have asked us to cover certain areas and see us as a thought leader. So today's episode is counter-surveillance. So counter-surveillance, what is it? Counter-surveillance is the use of a third party to identify whether there is a surveillance on a person. This sometimes gets confused with anti-surveillance. So anti-surveillance is a person who is being surveilled. They perform anti-surveillance themselves to be able to see if they're being followed. So very crude anti-surveillance might be constantly turning around, see if they're being followed, or going round a corner and stopping and seeing if a surveillance team come round with them, or using reflections in a shop window. Counter-surveillance is when the subject, the person that's being followed, doesn't try and find out whether they're being followed. It's another team, so it's employing third parties to find out if there's a surveillance on a person. So who may need counter-surveillance? Quite clearly, someone who is under surveillance and has surveillance imposed on them requires it. But what sort of demographic or person might this be? So we commonly find it's potentially a person that is in a position of power or trust. So it might be that someone's objective is to gain information on them to be able to then use it as blackmail potentially, or they might be a competitor. So they're trying to gain information about client base, new projects, meetings, etc. It could be that it's someone who's vulnerable and is likely to be a victim of crime. It could be that it's a high net worth individual or someone that controls assets or large assets. It could be that someone is cheating on their other half and they want to know whether there's a surveillance on them so that they can carry on with their affairs. It could be that someone has recently separated and you are worried that surveillance might be imposed on you because someone might want to know, one, who you're with now, or two, where you're now living. So it might be your former partner. It could be that it's an employee that works in a sensitive industry such as aerospace, banking, or oil and gas. Or it could be that it's an individual that works in a governmental role which is sensitive. So there are lots of reasons why or who might be followed. How do we do it though? So counter-surveillance. If a client is to ring us or a prospective client and request counter-surveillance, first of all, we will discuss with them their routine. So we've got to be careful here not to give too much away. However, we will give you the basics. So we will talk with the client and work out what their basic routine is, because the last thing we want to do is for us to be asking them to do something which isn't something that they usually do. So if they are under surveillance and they have been under surveillance for a period of time and their routine is known by whoever's surveilling them, the counter-surveillance team, then all of a sudden it's a different routine, then that would scream alarm bells for the surveillance team or the counter-surveillance team. And we don't want that. So we would discuss routine. What is your routine? What do you do? Where do you drive? Where do you walk to? What time do you leave? We would keep all that routine the same, but we would then start to plan a route, and we would discuss with the route with the client. So we would try and plan a route around their normal routine, whether that be in a vehicle or on foot. We would then try and find at least two, maybe more areas on that route where a foot surveillance team or a mobile surveillance team have no alternative but to follow the subject. So they can't do an alternative route to not be behind the subject through that, what we call choke point, which is where we can monitor people. We would then discuss the route with the client, make sure they're happy with that route, and then we would deploy two surveillance operatives to monitor either key areas on that route or to follow the subject and perform counter-surveillance. We will then be able to inform the client whether we have had double or triple sightings of a person or of a vehicle, and that we would make sure the route would not be a natural route where you would have the same vehicles or people behind you. So that's how we do it without going into too much detail. Counter surveillance is designed by its very nature not to be detected. So we could be trying to a counter surveillance on the best surveillance team in the world. The tactics we employ are designed that they won't detect that there's a counter surveillance in place to try and identify them. But secondly, they have no chance of even avoiding it. So they won't know we're there and they can't avoid it. And that's simple for any surveillance team, however good they are. Most surveillance teams, whether that be a governmental surveillance team or a private investigation team in Civvy Street, they do surveillance day in, day out. Human nature, they as a team will become complacent and lazy and sloppy. For an example of that will be a surveillance team on their way to a surveillance plot, which is the start location. They won't cleanse themselves. They won't start looking to see if they're being followed. They won't have their eyes in the back of the head when they leave their home address or the office where they have the briefing. And more importantly, after a day of surveillance, I would put my bottom dollar on it that most don't try and cleanse themselves when they come away from a surveillance for the day. And that is worrying because, firstly, if there is a county surveillance team on, not only have they got their vehicles or vehicle details during the operation and identified them as surveillance operatives and probably picked out the whole team, but they can then follow them to their work address where they debrief, or more worryingly, their home address. And then you've got family involved. So it's really important that the information we get, we're careful with it, but from a surveillance operative's point of view, if you are complacent, sloppy and lazy and you're not putting anti-surveillance methods in to stop people following you away, then that is extremely worrying, and the consequences, bearing in mind the type of people that we're sometimes instructed to follow or unaware of the type of people we're instructed to follow. But that's the sort of information we can get from a counter surveillance. We'll get details or vehicle details. We'll certainly get imagery of the individuals on foot or in vehicles. We can then various options to try and follow them away to the work address, the home address, or what have you. That is counter surveillance, a very, very useful tool, one that shouldn't be misused. But that's a brief insight into it without giving too much tactic away. So thanks for listening. As always, give us a thumbs up. If you want to see more episodes, subscribe because you'll get a push notification from YouTube. Till next time, thank you very much.